I think you need a critique and support from people who are going to say, don't write that way because this will happen, or don't do that because that will happen, or you could do this a lot better. This is great, but it needs to go up a whole new level. So I think that would be the first thing. Get help from people who are experienced, who've been on the journey, who've got scars themselves, and who struggled. They are the best people to give you advice.
Some experts chase attention, but the smart ones build authority. You're listening to the Authority on Demand podcast, where credibility becomes your competitive advantage. Every week, we're pulling back the curtain on how founders and leaders turn expertise into inbound demand through books that position, media that converse, and strategies that actually move the needle. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, your host and Chief Creative Officer at Authority on Demand. Now, let's turn your authority into leverage.
Okay, everybody. So what does it mean to truly encounter another way of life? To be transformed by the joys and the sorrows of an experience that cracks your world open? Well, our guest today, Ian Reilly, knows something about that. His gripping new memoir, Encounter, throws us into the deep end of cultural immersion as he and his wife navigate their roles as volunteer teachers in the Samoan village still reeling from a devastating cyclone. With vivid, sensory-rich prose, Ian captures a moment in Samoan history, but his own personal journey of growth, loss, and discovery. This is an incredible book, something that a lot of people can learn from, of course, and so today's episode is going to be all about that, along with some amazing writing tips. So, Ian, welcome to the show. I'm excited to chat with you.
Great, thanks. It's great to be here and great to talk.
Hey, real quick before we jump back in, if you're loving what we're doing here, hit that subscribe button and drop us a like. We're bringing you the best authors, the most real conversations, and all the writing wisdom that you didn't know you needed. So stick around because it only gets better from here. All right, now let's get back to the conversation.
Of course. Well, I have to just start off by learning a little about yourself and your wife, of course. I mean, what inspired the two of you to volunteer teaching in Samoa as a young couple?
Yeah, well, like many young couples, we were interested in travel overseas. We had by that stage married. We had finished university degrees. My wife was a full-time English teacher in a high school, and I was working as an engineer for the Department of Defense at the time. So we were keen to do that, but as Christians, we're also keen to serve. And so we wanted to engage with a different culture and really understand what it was like. So we went on a program which was really the equivalent of the Australian version of the Peace Corps in the US, which many US readers will be familiar with. So we applied, we had a little bit of training, and then we were offered a place in Samoa. We were given 3 days to accept, which we did. And then within 3 months, we were arriving in country. We wanted to experience a different culture. We didn't really quite understand what that meant. And doing that in a developing country, Samoa was pretty poor then. It's developed a lot more now, but we had the overlay of being in a developing country and living on a very basic level. The conditions of our employment were that we would be employed on local salary, so we got paid the same as a Samoan teacher, and in local conditions. So we were given a Samoan house to live in. And away we went. So following that, I actually spent a lot of my career doing international consulting, so working in countries in Europe, in Asia, and the US. And so the cultural experience of learning to adapt and make a connection within another culture became really valuable later on in life as well.
Of course. Yeah, I could only imagine. Wow, within 3 days, you said you're already, packing up the bags and getting ready to go. That seems like such a quick turnaround, but I guess when you're ready for it and you're excited, and the time just goes by like that anyway. So, wow, what a transformation, a cyclone in itself just getting there. And in my notes, I learned actually that you arrived as a cyclone was happening. Is that correct? Did I understand that
The
correctly?
cyclone came 2 weeks later.
2 weeks
So
later.
we were
Okay.
already reeling a little bit from the shock of arriving in a developing country, having never been overseas before ourselves. Um, and so we were sort of adjusting to that and starting to settle in. We'd been in our house a week, and then the cyclone arrived and literally started blowing things down around us. It went for 3 days
Wow.
consistently, and we were hunkered down with a bunch of other Americans, English, New Zealanders, and others in a couple of homes trying to weather our way through the cyclone. And then after that, it was a matter of recovery, getting water because our water supply was removed. We had no power. There was no telephone or anything like that. Most of the road to the school had been washed away into the sea, and we were running out of food. So we had to try and get to the capital and try and buy some food as soon as possible. Hmm.
Oh, yeah, you just hit the ground running then. My goodness. I mean, most people have never even stepped foot outside of their hometowns, and here you go, across the world and immediately in just like the trenches literally of a cyclone. So that's incredible. So it must have been just, such an experience to take that and then, immerse yourself in the culture. And I can only imagine
Yes.
the more, yeah, of course. And
So the
yeah,
interesting thing is that the cyclone actually gave us a crash course in culture because
yeah.
we were forced to live pretty much like a Samoan villager would live, cooking on a fire outside and carrying your water. We had to adapt straight away to cooking Samoan local foods. But we were bathing and washing in the village bathing pool and doing our laundry there, along with all the other people from nearby villages. So we very quickly had to learn how to live like a Samoan. And then that also taught us why, things that we thought were a little pretty strange when we first arrived, why they started to make sense after a while, one in our own immersion, literally, in a crash course. So it was a good experience looking back. It was hard at the time, but it was a good one. Yeah,
Yeah, it can be
unforgettable.
unforgettable for sure. And, the course of writing the book itself, I'm sure just made it even more unforgettable and kind of just, grounded those lessons and perspective into, your heart and your mind and soul. I can only imagine. I'm curious to know then, I mean, why did you decide to start writing a book now, like 30 years later? I'm wondering if there was a certain catalyst that made you choose, you know what, I'm going to put this down into a book, or perhaps there was always brewing in your mind.
Yeah, so when I was in Samoa, we wrote a lot of letters home, and we kept the letters. I also kept a journal and wrote stories down in a journal. Um, and I wrote anecdotes of different experiences as though I was writing it for a book rather than a journal. I wrote down some conversations and things like that. So I always had the plan to see if I could put that into a book. Um, and I've always wanted to write a book. I'd like to write a novel, but I've written Encounter as a memoir, but written like a novel. It's so much so that some readers have said, "Is it true?" I say, "Yes, it is true," but it's deliberately written like a novel in order to be engaging for the reader, to sort of draw them into the whole experience so that they feel like they're there. So the main barrier to not writing the book earlier was we came back from Samoa. We did some traveling to Europe and the US afterwards. We got back into our jobs. We had children. We had a mortgage, 2 young children, and then children going to school. And we had planned to go overseas again, but my wife was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, and that made that very difficult. And so the busyness of life and the intensity of having a career that was fairly demanding. I was an international consultant. I worked with clients in Europe, the US, Japan, China, Singapore, Hong Kong. And so there was a lot of overseas travel, and working very odd hours, often starting at 5:30 a.m. for our East Coast US clients and then finishing at 10 at night for our European clients. So that was quite intense and busy. And then later I launched an agri-tech startup in which you have to work at about 150% of your available time. And so the catalyst for writing the book was that I exited the startup by sale to our international investor in 2021. And that gave me sufficient funds to retire and be able to now focus on writing. So I started writing really within a few weeks of exiting my company. And then it was a case of, well, I was 58. I've written a lot of stuff in my life, but I haven't written a book. So I thought I'd start by writing some stories. So I sat down with the computer and a cup of coffee and it just started. I thought I would start with one story and send it to my children. They're grown up now and both married. Let them see what they think of the story. And so they were encouraging. So I wrote another story and then another story. And then after a while, I thought, well, I really need to get these things sort of understood. So I went and pulled out the letters to try and understand what we were thinking and to get some more background and read the journal stories that I'd written. And then I decided, if I'm going to do this, I really should get some help.
So what sort of help did you have to reach out to? What do you mean by that? Editors?
I Googled, of course, a local writers group. So Melbourne is in the state of Victoria. Australia is set up in a model very similar to the US, except that we have 6 states rather than 50. Having said that, it's just as difficult to get agreement between 6 states as it is 50, I think. So in Victoria, there is a group called Writers Victoria, which is a not-for-profit group that basically is there to assist writers and engage with them. So I engaged a mentor who was an accomplished author. We met every 2 weeks for coffee, and every 2 weeks I would bring the next, 4,000 words for her to look at and review. Then she'd review, she'd comment, we'd talk about it, she'd suggest different things to look at, ways I might be able to write it differently. And essentially what I had to do was establish what is my voice, what's the style in which would best suit me writing this memoir and my readers reading it. So to do that, I looked at some of my favorite authors who include Frank McCourt, who wrote Angela's Ashes, Hemingway, Steinbeck, and then Tolkien, various other English writers, to look at how did they write it? How did they write their books? How did they write their memoirs? How did they engage the reader? What style resonated well? So I chose the way that Frank McCourt wrote Angela's Ashes, which is in the present tense, simple present, and then started writing with that voice. We experimented with that for about 6 months and then settled on a style and a voice and a tense and a point of view, and then started to write stories in more earnest. Once I'd written about 250,000 words, I then started to see how I could pull that into a narrative with a plot. So the problem here is that while a memoir is great, in that the story is true, too many memoirs are written in the style of, this is who I am, I did this, and then I did that, and then this happened, and then we did that, and so on. And I didn't want to take my reader through that style of journey. I wanted them to feel like they were really there and really part of the whole experience. So I copied Frank McCourt a lot in his style to do that. And then I needed a plot because a good story has a plot. So I did various courses on how to structure a plot, to work out what characters I need. So I took some of the characters out. I developed others more strongly than some to work out who are the main protagonists in the story. That's me, but it's also the immediate people around me as well. So I worked out a plot and then drafted the narrative, and then I sent it to editors to review. So I paid editors to do a thorough review of the whole book. And these were experienced editors for Penguin or Hachette in the UK, and got their feedback, and then did a beta version, sent it to people, got their feedback, and finally arrived at a finished work.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for walking us through that entire process. It sounds like it was really a journey of discovery from start to finish, sort of just first you had the experience all those years ago, and then you had to kind of wait for the right time in life to sit down with a cup of coffee and start. And then, well, through writers groups and editors, you finally were able to find your voice and get it out there. It definitely was not an easy process. And I think that everybody listening today can agree that, well, that's kind of how writing works, right? It's a trial and error
Yeah.
journey, kind of like the journey you took itself, journey to begin with.
Yeah, and I
So,
think one of the advantages of doing this later in life is that I have a lot of experience within business, just getting things done and knowing when you need help and the value of sometimes paying for that help. A cup of coffee is a nice thing, and getting some advice, but getting real advice from people who are very experienced does cost money. And I was at a stage of life where I was able to engage people to really give me that help and pick out the right people to help me. So I think that having the experience and maturity really helped a lot compared to if I was trying to write the same thing in my 20s. It would have been a much bigger struggle. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, so I really just have to do with time of life and perspective then too. So that's something a lot of people can learn from as well. So yes, as a note to the audience then, if they're interested in reading more about the book and checking it out, well, I'm curious to know where's the best place people can get in touch and find it. I know it's on Amazon. Any other places that people can click on and learn a little bit more?
Yeah. So in the US, Amazon, Barnes and Noble will do US, UK, and Australia too. Um, the publisher put it on a site which goes to a lot of other different book distributors in Europe and other places as well. But if you just Google Encounter, A Journey into Chaos, Culture and Compassion, it will tell you where you can buy it. You can also buy it directly off my website, ianreilly.com.au, and happy to ship, throughout the world where people are. They can order it easily off one of those sites or a website.
Well,
Yeah.
perfect. Well, we're going to put the links in the description box of this podcast today so we can click on over and get in the know and, head right to it, everybody. So amazing stuff. I appreciate that. Well, now that you have the book on the shelves, though, my next question is this. What's next for you? I mean, you've wrote this book, it's out there. Do you have any other projects that people can be on the lookout for? Anything that's kind of brewing in your mind now that you have one book out? Some people tend to get a hunger for the writing process.
Yes. Um, so I ended up with a lot of stories that didn't make it into this book. So, and I was encouraged to, look at writing a second book. Now that people are reading my book, they're asking me for the second book. They're keen to know what happens next. This memoir really only covers the first 3 to 4 months of our experience in Samoa. And people are often surprised, wow, that's a lot of words for 3 to 4 months, but a lot of things happened, and it was very intense. And I've written it in a way that gives the person the experience of that level of intensity of life. So yes, I've got two more books planned. The second one I've got half drafted. Um, I should take us to the end of the first year of our time in Samoa, and then the third book would cover the second year. Our experience ended with another cyclone that was worse than the first. Um,
Oh,
so in the last 130 years, Samoa has had two severe cyclones, and we were managed to be there for both of them. So the second book will finish with the second cyclone.
okay. Well, that's
Yeah.
actually incredible. So how many, so I have curiosity, just two cyclones, or are there more that we should be on the lookout for? Only two, or what else should we
No,
think
they haven't had a severe cyclone. They've had the tail end of other cyclones where they get a lot of wind and rain, but not the devastation that these did. Yeah. They had a tsunami in 2011, I think, or 2013, I can't remember, um, which devastated a small part of the coast on the south of the island. But apart from that, it's been pretty disaster free. It was just when we were there. Yeah. So I
understand?
would like to write more books. I would like to write an engineering thriller.
Oh, that's a kind of left field, but out of curiosity, then where that could be inspired by.
So, engineers solve a lot of problems, and life as a product designer for designing products for companies overseas on a time frame is a pretty exciting experience. So it's not dissimilar to a thriller. Um,
Understand.
and I think I could craft a plot. And there are a lot of people, I guess mainly men, perhaps, but who are very interested in the intricacies of, how things work and problem solving. And so I think, John Grisham wrote thrillers based on being a lawyer. And you have to admit, lawyering is pretty boring as a profession on the outside. It doesn't seem that exciting. But he managed to weave, really exciting stories in the work of a solicitor in a small country town in the US somewhere, and make a thriller out of it. And I think you can make a thriller out of anything, as long as you've got an engaging plot that sucks people in and gets them into the story. So that would be a
Yeah.
good thing I'd like to do. Yeah. I tell
Okay.
people I've written Encounter like a thriller, and it's true.
I can see how
I
there's
did
a lot of
copy.
thrilling elements.
I did copy Lee Child and the way he writes the Reacher books, and John le Carre is the famous spy author, and I reread John Grisham as well to see how is it, what do they do to get the reader wanting to read the next page and the next chapter and keep reading. What do they do? How do they do that? So I've tried to put that into Encounter, and people are saying they can't put it down, which is great.
Yeah, I could only imagine. And I can see why. There's so many elements that you can draw from and take from, and just turning the page. Because first off, not a lot of people have had that experience in itself. But I could imagine the different elements that you had to, go through and learn from an experience just all add up to that. So perfect stuff.
Yeah.
Now, to the authors listening today, and as we begin to wrap up our conversation, I'm curious to know if there's any sort of writing tips, tricks, any lessons that you learned along the way that you think that especially first time authors can learn from that you learned from during this process.
Yeah. I think it's hard to speak for other people, but the first thing I would recommend is to get help. But get help from people who know about writing, who've been themselves, who've been on the journey. Um, so, for example, if you get advice from your friends, they'll generally be far too optimistic and far too positive and encouraging. And while that's great to start writing, to actually make it something that someone will pick up off the shelf in a bookshop and read and enjoy, who doesn't know you or anything about you. I think you need a critique and support from people who are going to say, don't write that way because this will happen, or don't do that because that will happen, or you could do this a lot better. This is great, but it needs to go up a whole new level to be a book that a publisher is going to be willing to publish. So I think that would be the first thing. Get help from people who are experienced, who've been on the journey, who've got scars themselves, and who struggled. They are the best people to give you advice. And I think the other one is, I think it was Hemingway's advice, is just sit down and write for 3 to 4 hours every day.
Absolutely. Stick to it too.
Yeah. So I relied a lot on other authors. It doesn't mean I copied them, but I learned a lot from them. And, I guess I'm blessed by the fact that I have always read pretty widely and I love literature. So to help with what I was writing, I reread Romeo and Juliet, Hamlet, Midsummer Night's Dream, to look at how Shakespeare was using words to create images, to create emotion, and so on. I went back to the Romantic poets, Keats, Byron, Shelley, Wordsworth, to look at how they would do constructing that within their poetry. And T.S. Eliot is another one. It's difficult to understand unless you think about the way he's structuring the images and the words, and the way he's using poetic devices, even with what appears like prose. So yeah, I would go back and look at people who've done it really well and enjoy their work and look at, why is it that you enjoy that? Why is it that this is good? What makes it good for you? What are the tools and the tricks and things that this author's doing? Yeah, I found that pretty helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah. So all of those are amazing pieces of advice. Of course, always look to other authors that you're inspired by, and that's how you get your best ideas. So honestly, this has been such an insightful conversation. I think if you've been listening today, no matter what stage of the writing process you might be on, whether you're a beginner, whether you're halfway through the process, or even thinking about your next book, I mean, right here, Ian, you've given us all terrific insights. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing all of this with us. Guys, if you're inspired today, well, the first step you can do is, of course, check out the book Encounter. It's available everywhere. We're going to put the links in the description box of this podcast. And of course, stay up to date with Ian and what he has to offer in store. Sounds like he has some really incredible projects in the future. So great stuff. Ian, it's been a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, thank you. It's been great. Been a great conversation. Yeah.
Absolutely. And everybody, again, if you're inspired, check out the books. And hey, if this sparked an idea for your own books, maybe you too have your own cyclone-esque experience in your life, well, don't hesitate to write it down. Don't wait 30 years, or maybe do whatever the best time of your life might be for writing. Just start putting it on the page, get it out there. And if you need any help, well, Authors on Mission is always there to help you with the writing process too. And if you're more inspired, well, check out Ian's work, connect with him on socials. The links are in the description box. Until next time, everybody, keep writing, keep leading, and keep inspiring. This has been another episode of the Authors on Mission podcast.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Authority on Demand podcast. If today's conversation sparked something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share this episode with a founder or leader who's ready to stop being the best kept secret in their industry. If you want to turn your expertise into inbound demand, head to authorityondemand.com to see how we help clients go from unknown to in demand. I'm Danielle Hutchinson, and I'll catch you on the next one. Now, go build some authority.